Welcome to today's Explainer. I am so excited to take you through this completely fascinating chapter of history. All right, I want you to picture a young, incredibly chaotic Rome. We're not talking about the glorious marble empire we usually think of, right? This is a rough, violent settlement facing a massive power vacuum because its legendary founder, Romulus, has just mysteriously vanished into a dark marsh. The city is terrified, it's divided, and honestly, it's teetering right on the edge.
So that brings us to a really core question. What happens to a city built on war when the war is actually over? Imagine a divided city filled with soldiers who possess what ancient historians called a hard and iron temper. The population is split right down the middle. You've got the original Romans who followed Romulus on one side and the newly incorporated Sabines on the other. They're desperately rotating senators in an interregnum just to keep the lights on, basically, and they desperately need a leader to avoid plunging straight into civil war.
Okay, let's dive into this comparison because the Romans always believed they were a people forged by two entirely different men. Romulus used the sword and war to physically build a city, but the man we're focusing on today, Numa Pompilius, he used piety and peace to teach the city how to actually live. It's like a giant puzzle. Without the violence of Romulus, Rome wouldn't exist, but without the piety of Numa, they would have just remained a violent band of mercenaries.
Part 1. The Reluctant Second King. Rejecting the crown.
So these rotating senators finally decide to offer the crown to a 40-year-old Sabine outsider, a guy from the small city of Cures named Numa. And Numa's response? It's an absolute masterpiece of self-knowledge. He basically says, yeah, no thank you. He tells them that only madness could induce someone completely satisfied with his quiet life to take over a city built on war. He preferred farming. He liked religious study, unwarlike occupations. He flat out told the Roman ambassadors, look, your city needs a military captain, not a king of peace. Which makes you wonder, why would a city of hardened warriors choose a man of peace? It seems like a total paradox, right? Well, the ambassadors, and actually Numa's own father, pushed back hard. They convinced him that his virtues, his incorruptible justice, his deep religious seriousness, these were divine gifts. And to just hide those gifts away on a farm when the public desperately needed them, that was a waste. They convinced him that leading Rome was, in and of itself, a form of religious service. So he finally relented. Once Numa arrived in Rome and the omens were approved, he was crowned. And his very first act? Oh, it was immediate. He dismissed the Celeris. Now, this was the legendary 300-man royal bodyguard that Romulus had used to protect himself and, intimidate his rivals. By sending these armed guards packing on day one, Numa set a profound tone. He was essentially declaring, I'm not going to distrust the people who just trusted me with the throne. He was going to rule by trust, not by force. A real game changer.
Section 2. Taming the Iron Romans. Forging a new mindset.
Numa realized right out of the gate that his core problem was the Roman psychology. Like we said, Plutarch described them as having a hard and iron temper. Numa knew that just handing down mere laws and statutes, they'd just break against that iron. So he invented a new methodology, religion as politics. He used processions, sacred dances, and this constant, persistent presence of the gods to give every single day a sacred shape. He was literally using religious awe to soften, mold, and discipline this hyper-aggressive population.
And the type of religion he introduced was radically different from what you might expect. Early Roman worship under Numa was aniconic, which means no statues or images of gods in human or animal form for 170 years. None. And it was entirely bloodless. Instead of massive animal sacrifices, they used simple flour and wine. This gentle approach actually aligned really closely with Pythagorean philosophy. Numa was essentially acting as a philosopher king, trying to bring gentleness and equity to what Plato would call a city in high fever.
Section 3. Designing Roman Religion. Hardwiring peace into the calendar.
To actually pull this off, Numa built specific, ingenious institutions to quite literally hack the Roman mindset. First up, he established the Pontifex Maximus. This was the newly founded office of the chief priest. By creating this role, Numa built a structured clergy to oversee all public rituals and just maintain order from the top down. The Pontifex Maximus was the ultimate authority on sacred law and was specifically tasked with guarding our next group. The Vestal Virgins. These women followed an incredible 30-year life cycle. They were 6 priestesses dedicated to Vesta, the goddess of the hearth, and they were responsible for keeping Rome's sacred fire burning. 10 years learning the rites, 10 years performing them, and 10 years teaching them. Their dedication was intense, and they held massive societal power. Get this, they could pardon a condemned man just by accidentally crossing his path in the street. But the stakes were equally high. Breaking their vow of chastity resulted in the absolutely terrifying punishment of being buried alive.
Okay, next we have what I like to call Rome's speed bump to war, the Fetials. This is so brilliant. Numa created a college of priestly heralds who held the sole authority to declare war. The Roman army physically couldn't just march out and attack a neighbor impulsively anymore. The Fetials had to attempt formal negotiation first. If that failed, they had to ritually pronounce the negotiations over. Only after all that, by staining a spear, was armed conflict legally permitted. Numa deliberately designed this procedural roadblock to stop impulsive, aggressive military campaigns in their tracks.
And Numa didn't stop at institutions. He literally rewired time itself. He restructured the Roman calendar, expanding it from 10 months to 12 by adding January and February. Then he instituted fasts and nephos days. This strictly separated days where legal and public business could happen from sacred rest days where it absolutely could not. Period. He also introduced the Sali, the dancing priests of Mars. He completely wove religious obligation and mandatory rest into the very fabric of the Roman year.
Section 4. Two views of history. Philosopher or pragmatist?
All right, let's play historical detective for a second and look at how two drastically different ancient historians viewed Numa's reign. On one side, we've got Plutarch, writing from a Greek perspective. He paints Numa as this noble philosopher king, heavily inspired by gentle Pythagorean philosophy, and he treats Numa's claims of divine inspiration with a sort of gentle skepticism. On the other side, we have Livy, writing 2 centuries earlier from a purely Roman perspective. Livy is openly cynical. He doesn't see a philosopher at all. He sees a calculated, pragmatic founder who is deliberately exploiting religious awe to control a savage population.
In fact, Livy famously noted that Numa pretended, his word, to have nightly meetings in a sacred grove with a divine nymph named Egeria. Livy argues that Numa knew he couldn't gain credibility for such radical, peaceful laws among violent soldiers without some fiction of a miracle. Honestly, whether it was divine truth or just a brilliant political fabrication, ancient politics often required a supernatural stamp of approval to enact massive societal change.
Section 5. A legacy of peace. The impact of the second king. Regardless of whether he was a pious philosopher or just a deeply cynical pragmatist, his strategy undeniably worked. He engaged the Roman minds so deeply in ritual that even neighboring nations considered it a sin to attack a city so wholly occupied with worship. Numa died peacefully in old age around 673 BC, and by the time of his death, the Romans and Sabines were completely fused into one people. Interestingly enough, he was buried alongside his sacred writings in a stone tomb. Centuries later, the tomb was unearthed, and the Roman Senate actually burned the books, judging his original teachings as deeply dangerous to the public religion of their time. Just a fascinating little historical footnote. But I want to leave you with this number, 43. This is the ultimate proof of Numa's success. For an astonishing 43 years, the entirety of his reign, the double doors of the Temple of Janus remained completely shut. Now, those doors only ever stood open during times of war. To have them shut for 43 years meant 2 entire generations experienced uninterrupted peace. That was a truly unimaginable achievement in the Iron City Romulus had built.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought to ponder. Is true power found in the sword that conquers or the piety that unites? Numa Pompilius ruled a city of warriors for over 4 decades without winning a single battle and without killing a single enemy. He transformed the psychology of a society just by changing their habits. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I hope this sparks your curiosity to keep exploring the incredible mechanics of history and human nature. Catch you next time.